Carol Peterson believed a home was more than just a structure. It was a living archive of a life well lived, a physical manifestation of prudence and persistence. Her two-bedroom bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street in suburban Ohio was the culmination of 30 years of disciplined work as an office manager. Every morning, she would wake before the sun, the ritual of brewing coffee and balancing her checkbook to the penny a small, comforting ceremony. This house was her partner in that ritual. She knew the creak of the third step on the staircase, the way the morning light slanted through the kitchen window to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the air. Every polished oak floorboard, every flowering rosebush in her meticulously tended garden was a testament to her steadfast nature. In the evenings, she would sit in her favorite wingback chair, the one with the slightly faded floral pattern she'd inherited from her mother, and feel a profound sense of peace that money couldn't buy, but had certainly paid for. This house, with its photos on the mantel, of her late parents, eternally young and smiling, of a younger, more carefree Carol on a long-ago vacation, was her fortress of solitude and her greatest achievement. It was a life built on responsibility, a principle she held as sacred as any religion. This principle was often, and exhaustively, tested by her younger brother Kevin. He was her only remaining family, the last link to a shared childhood of scraped knees and whispered secrets, and she loved him with a fierce, protective loyalty that often felt more like an obligation. But where Carol was an anchor, Kevin was a kite, soaring on the winds of charisma and reckless optimism, always moments away from a snapped string. He and his wife, Jessica, who seemed to worship his every ill-conceived idea, were a whirlwind of get-rich-quick schemes and ill-fated investments. They saw Carol not just as a sister, but as a reliable, predictable safety net, woven from her own hard work. 6 years ago, it was the sure-thing cryptocurrency that was going to make them all millionaires. It vaporized several thousand of Carol's dollars. 2 years after that, it was the down payment for a revolutionary gourmet taco truck. Carol had pictured it vividly, the vibrant logo, the lines of happy customers. The reality was a repossessed truck and a string of excuses about zoning permits and supplier issues. Each time Kevin would appear on her doorstep, his charm laced with a pathetic desperation that Carol found impossible to refuse. Jessica would stand behind him, her eyes wide with manufactured hope, murmuring about how this time, things would be different. Carol always knew they wouldn't, but the bonds of family, of a promise made to their dying mother to always look out for him, were a debt she felt compelled to pay. She had long ago accepted her role. As she snipped a wilting petunia from its stem, she sighed, content in her quiet, orderly world, blissfully unaware of the hurricane gathering just over the horizon. The shrill ring of the landline phone inside pierced the afternoon tranquility. It was Kevin. His voice wasn't its usual breezy tenor. It was a ragged whisper choked with an unfamiliar static of panic. "Carol, can I come over? I need to talk to you. It's important." "I can't do this over the phone." An hour later, Kevin stood on her doorstep, a ghost of his usual self. The charismatic sparkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, hollowed-out vacancy. His normally confident posture was slumped, his shoulders rounded as if carrying an invisible, crushing weight. He wore a frayed sweatshirt and jeans, a deliberate costume of destitution that, in her rising panic, Carol didn't even register. His face was ashen, and his eyes, which he'd clearly been rubbing raw, were puffy and bloodshot. He looked like an actor who had tried too hard to appear unwell, but Carol only saw her little brother, broken. He collapsed into the armchair opposite her, the one her father used to favor, and buried his face in his hands as a ragged sob tore from his chest. Jessica wasn't with him, a detail that amplified the sense of dread coiling in Carol's stomach. Their scams were always a two-person act. This was different. This felt terrifyingly real. "Kevin, what is it? What's wrong?" "You're scaring me," she said, her voice trembling as she knelt on the rug beside him, her hand hovering over his back, afraid to touch him as if he might shatter. He looked up, his expression a mask of pure despair so masterfully executed it could have won an award. "It's cancer, Carol," he whispered, the words hanging in the air like poison, instantly wilting the cozy atmosphere of the room. "Pancreatic." The doctors, They said it's aggressive, a rare variant. They gave me 6 months, maybe less. The room tilted. The floral pattern on the wallpaper seemed to swim before Carol's eyes. She felt the air rush from her lungs as if she'd been punched. Pancreatic cancer. It was a death sentence. Her mind flashed to their father, gaunt and frail in a hospital bed, taken by lung cancer a decade ago. The memory was a fresh, searing pain, a wound that had never truly healed. She couldn't lose Kevin too. She just couldn't. Kevin, a predator sensing weakness, saw his words had landed with the intended devastating force. He pressed on. He fumbled in his jacket pocket and pulled out a glossy, professionally printed trifold brochure. "But there's one chance," he said, his voice cracking with just the right amount of desperate hope. "It's a clinic, a private research facility in Arizona. They're doing this new experimental treatment, a targeted peptide therapy. It's not covered by insurance, not yet. But the trial results... Carol, they're calling it a miracle." He spread the brochure on the coffee table. It was a slick piece of marketing, filled with smiling, reassuringly diverse actors posing as doctors, and impressive, complex-looking charts with upward trending lines. The name Sonoran Hope Medical Center was emblazoned across the top in a comforting, trustworthy blue font. He pointed a shaking finger at a cost breakdown on the back panel. It was a dizzying list of scientific-sounding jargon: peptide synthesis, genomic sequencing, immunomodulatory infusions, inpatient care. The final figure at the bottom made Carol's blood run cold: $265,000. It was an impossible sum. It was everything she had, and more. "I don't know what to do," Kevin sobbed, his performance reaching its crescendo. "Jessica is a wreck. We have nothing. I'm going to die, Carol. They said to get my affairs in order." That night, sleep was a stranger, a cruel visitor who refused to enter her room. Carol lay in her bed, the bed she had bought with her first big promotion, and stared at the familiar patterns the moonlight made on her ceiling. But she saw nothing. The house, her sanctuary, her life's work, suddenly felt like a gilded cage. Its comfort was a mockery, its security an insult to her brother's plight. Her mind was a tumultuous sea of memories, tossing her between past and present. She saw Kevin as a 7-year-old with a scraped knee, running to her for a bandage and a hug, his face streaked with tears. Scraped knee. She saw him at their parents' funeral, his arm a surprising source of strength around her, whispering, "It's just us now, Carol. We have to look out for each other." How could she put a price on that? How could she weigh drywall and property taxes against the life of her only brother? The logic was brutal, simple, and inescapable. The house was just bricks and mortar, wood and wire. It was an object. Kevin was blood. Her blood. The last piece of her past still walking the earth. She rose before dawn, the sky outside a bruised purple. The despair of the night had been replaced by a grim, unwavering sense of purpose. A cold clarity had settled over her, the kind that comes when all other options have been stripped away. Her first call was to her financial advisor, a cautious man named Mark, who had managed her 401k for 15 years. His voice, usually so calm and measured, was laced with palpable alarm as she explained her intention to liquidate the entire account. "Carol, the tax penalties alone will be devastating," he warned, his tone pleading. "This is your entire retirement, every penny you've saved. Are you absolutely certain this is the only way?" "I am," she replied, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "It's a matter of life and death." The second call was harder. It was to a local real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Barb, whom she knew from the neighborhood garden club. "Barb, it's Carol Peterson. I need to sell my house." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "You're selling?" Barb finally asked, her surprise evident. "But you love that house more than anything." "Something's come up," Carol said, the understatement hanging heavy in the air. "I need a quick sale. I'm willing to price it aggressively." The following weeks were a surreal blur of paperwork, open houses, and emotional farewells. She walked through each room, packing away 30 years of her life into brown cardboard boxes. Each photo album, each piece of furniture, each chipped coffee mug held a memory she was now trading away for a chance, a hope. The day she packed the contents of her wing-back chair's side table, a well-worn novel, a pair of reading glasses, a framed photo of her and Kevin as children at the beach. She finally broke down, her sobs echoing in the empty room. The day the sale closed, she sat in her lawyer's office and signed the final papers, her hand surprisingly steady. A profound numbness had settled over her, a self-preservation mechanism shielding her from the full, crushing magnitude of her sacrifice. She had a mission. The house was gone. Her retirement was gone. But she was giving her brother a chance to live. In that moment, it felt like the only choice she could have ever made. The contrast between her old life and the new was a daily, jarring assault on her senses. Carol's new home was a third-floor, one-bedroom apartment in a faceless complex across town that overlooked a cracked and oil-stained parking lot. The air in the hallway smelled of stale cigarette smoke and boiled cabbage, a sterile, institutional scent that was the antithesis of the rich, loamy smell of her garden's soil after a rain. The hollow, comforting echo of her old, spacious house was replaced by the constant, intrusive noise of her neighbors' televisions and arguments bleeding through the paper-thin walls. After the movers left her few remaining possessions, a bed, a small table, and a pile of boxes, she sat on a cardboard box labeled kitchen and wept. The tears weren't for herself, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of her new reality. The next day, she walked into her bank, a place where she was once greeted by name, now just another anonymous customer. She completed the wire transfer, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She watched the teller's fingers fly across the keyboard, and with a final emotionless click, her life savings, a staggering sum of over $250,000, vanished from her account and into Kevin's. Her life shrank with her surroundings. Her diet, once full of fresh produce from her garden, became a monotonous rotation of instant noodles, canned soup, and toast. The leisurely drives in her paid-off sedan were replaced by long, crowded bus rides where she would stare out the window, her reflection a pale, tired ghost against the passing city. She picked up every extra shift she could at work, the physical exhaustion a welcome distraction from the emotional ache in her bones. Her only connection to the reason for this bleak new existence was Kevin's sporadic phone calls. They were always brief, his voice intentionally weak and raspy, a performance she now realized he must have practiced. "It was a rough week," he'd say, a carefully placed sigh punctuating the sentence. "The treatments are just, they take so much out of you." He spoke in vague, unassailable terms, never offering concrete details. "The doctors say the markers are trending in the right direction, but it's a long, slow fight." Sometimes Jessica would get on the line, her voice dripping with a syrupy gratitude that now, in retrospect, was nauseating. "Carol, you're a saint, a guardian angel. We thank God for you every single day. We don't know what we'd do without you." These calls were a lifeline for Carol, a painful reinforcement that her sacrifice was meaningful, that she was actively saving his life. She clung to these brief, scripted updates like a drowning woman clinging to a splinter of wood, never allowing herself to question them, for to do so would be to admit that the sterile apartment, the empty bank account, and the gnawing loneliness might all be for nothing. At work, Carol became a ghost of her former self. The bright, hyper-efficient office manager who knew everyone's birthday and kept the supply closet in perfect order was replaced by a woman with dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes and a perpetual slump in her shoulders. She was thinner, quieter, and her interactions became clipped and perfunctory. Her colleagues, who knew of her brother's illness, treated her with a delicate, whispering sympathy, leaving mugs of tea on her desk and avoiding her gaze as if her grief were contagious. Her focus on her work became her only refuge, a place where spreadsheets and schedules provided a temporary, orderly distraction from the chaotic anxiety that consumed her personal life. Her boss, Mr. Davies, a kind, observant man in his late 60s with a full head of white hair, had known Carol for over 20 years. He had hired her himself. He watched her slow decline with a growing fatherly concern, mistaking her burnout and stress for the profound, anticipatory grief of a sister watching her brother fade away. One dreary Tuesday afternoon, he called her into his spacious corner office. "Carol, close the door," he said gently, gesturing to the plush chair opposite his large mahogany desk. She sat, her back rigid, expecting a conversation about her dipping performance or a suggestion that she take a leave of absence. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression full of genuine compassion. "I know the last few months have been hell for you," he began, his voice soft. "I can't even imagine what you're going through. Your devotion to your brother, what you're doing for him. Well, it's truly remarkable. You're a wonderful sister." He paused. "But you're running on fumes, Carol. I see it every day. You can't help him if you collapse." Carol simply nodded, a lump forming in her throat, too tired to speak. "The company and I personally appreciate everything you do," Mr. Davies continued, "and we want to do something for you." He slid a thick, glossy envelope across the polished desk. "This is a first-class, all-expenses-paid, one-week trip to the Grand Wailea Resort in Maui. Everything is taken care of. Flights, hotel, a food and activity stipend. The works." Carol stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "Oh no, Mr. Davies, I couldn't possibly," she stammered, the words rushing out. "With Kevin so sick, going to a resort? It wouldn't be right." But her boss was insistent. "Nonsense. It's not a request, it's a prescription. My wife and I went there for our anniversary. The place is paradise. You need sun, you need rest, and you need to recharge your batteries. Go. Let the ocean wash some of this stress away. We'll handle everything here." A part of her recoiled at the indulgence, the guilt sharp and immediate. The thought of herself on a beach while Kevin was supposedly enduring agonizing treatments felt like a monstrous betrayal. But another, deeper part of her, a part that was bone-weary and soul-tired, cried out for the reprieve. The thought of warmth, of quiet, of a single day without the crushing weight of her reality was an irresistible siren song. With a lump in her throat and tears welling in her eyes, she reluctantly accepted, clutching the envelope that felt both like a sin and a salvation. The moment Carol stepped off the plane in Maui, the warm, humid air, thick with the intoxicating scent of plumeria and salt, embraced her like a long-lost friend. The sheer, overwhelming beauty of the Grand Wailea Resort was staggering. Opulent waterfalls cascaded into a network of 9 turquoise pools, and the vast Pacific Ocean glittered under a perfect cloudless sky. It was a world away from the gray Ohio winter she had left behind. For the first time in 6 excruciating months, a small, fragile piece of her began to unclench. She found a quiet lounge chair by the adults-only Serenity Pool, a spot intentionally chosen for its peace. She ordered a simple iced tea, the guilt of the luxury still nipping at her conscience. She felt like an imposter, a fraud enjoying a paradise she hadn't earned. She watched the other guests, their faces relaxed and content, and felt a million miles away from her stark apartment and her brother's grim fight for life. She closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face, trying to absorb a sliver of the peace that surrounded her. She was watching a couple laugh on the far side of the pool when a sound cut through the gentle murmur of the resort and the soft lapping of water. It was a laugh, a loud, braying, unmistakably familiar laugh. Her head snapped up, her senses on high alert. Her eyes scanned the crowd, landing on a man with his back to her at the swim-up bar, gesturing expansively as he told a story to the bartender. The posture, the cocky tilt of his head. It couldn't be. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, panicked bird trapped in her chest. Then the man turned to clink his glass with the woman beside him. The shock was a physical blow, a silent explosion that sucked the air from her lungs and left a ringing in her ears. It was Kevin. Not a sick, dying Kevin, but a tanned, muscular Kevin, radiating a vibrant, disgusting health. And beside him, beaming and adorned in a designer swimsuit that likely cost more than Carol's monthly rent, was Jessica. They were clinking, tall, expensive-looking cocktails, the kind with pineapple wedges and little paper umbrellas, the very picture of carefree opulence. The world dissolved into a silent, roaring tunnel. Disbelief was the first wave, a desperate mental grasping for another explanation. A look-alike? A hallucination brought on by stress and grief? But it was him. The scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood fall. The specific, smug way he smiled. His right eyebrow. It was them. The second wave was a dawning, sickening horror that churned in her gut like acid. The grueling treatments. The raspy voice, the long, slow fight. It all flashed through her mind, a reel of monstrous, unforgivable lies. Her sold house, her empty 401k, her life of instant noodles and long bus rides, all of it had paid for this, for their cocktails, for their tans, for their laughter at her expense. The horror receded, and in its place rose a fury so cold and pure it burned away every last ounce of grief and pity. Her hands trembled, not with shock anymore, but with a rage that settled deep in her bones. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, she fumbled in her bag, her movements slow and deliberate. She pulled out her phone, switched it to video, and shielded the screen with her hand. She zoomed in, capturing a crystal-clear, damning image of her brother and his wife living lavishly on the ruins of her life. Carol didn't scream. She didn't run across the meticulously landscaped pool deck to unleash the hurricane of fury that was raging inside her. Her rage was too profound, too absolute for a messy public scene. She was a planner, a strategist, and in that moment, the grieving, sacrificial lamb inside her died a quiet death, and a cold, calculating avenger was born. She calmly placed a $20 bill on the table for her $4 iced tea, rose from her chair, and walked with measured, even steps back to the cool marble sanctuary of her room. She locked the deadbolt behind her. The click of the lock was a sound of finality. Sinking onto the edge of the king-sized bed, a bed she now viewed with utter contempt, she replayed the video. Over and over, she watched them laugh, watched Kevin lean in to kiss Jessica, watched them toast to their deception. The video was her proof, her confession, her weapon. The betrayal was no longer just a gut-wrenching feeling. It was a digital file, a piece of irrefutable, time-stamped evidence. The 5-hour flight back to the mainland was the longest, most agonizing journey of her life. Trapped at 35,000 feet in a pressurized cabin, she was a prisoner with her churning, venomous thoughts. Every lie Kevin had ever told her, not just in the last 6 months but over their entire lives, played on a loop in her mind. Every calculated tear, every fabricated expression of pain was now seen in the harsh, unforgiving light of the Hawaiian sun. The kindness of Mr. Davies, which had felt like a blessing, now seemed like a cruel cosmic joke. He had unwittingly funded her trip to the scene of the crime. The warm memories of her home, of the life she had built with her own 2 hands, were now irrevocably tainted, forever linked to the grand, monstrous scam that had stolen it from her. Grief for the brother she thought she had was a luxury she could no longer afford. It had been cauterized on that pool deck, the wound seared shut by a white-hot anger, leaving behind only a scar of diamond-hard resolve. She paid the exorbitant fee for the in-flight Wi-Fi, her fingers flying across her phone's small keyboard with a newfound purpose. She didn't search for vacation photos or news headlines. She searched for top fraud litigation attorneys in Cleveland. She scrolled through websites, past the smiling corporate headshots, reading testimonials, and looking for specific words. Aggressive, relentless, fraud, asset recovery. She was arming herself. She found a firm whose partners looked like sharks in expensive suits and saved the number. She took screenshots of the wire transfer confirmation from her banking app and the statements showing the massive withdrawal. She was no longer crumbling. She was building a case, brick by damning brick. She was no longer. By the time the plane's wheels touched down on the tarmac back in Ohio, the jolt of landing a physical punctuation mark on her transformation, Carol Peterson was a different woman from the one who had departed. The weary, heartbroken victim was gone. In her place was a woman fueled by a cold, righteous fury, her mind clear and her purpose singular. Her first call was not to a friend for comfort, but to the law office she had found, scheduling an emergency consultation for the following morning. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. Carol's cramped apartment no longer felt like a prison. In the days following her return, it had transformed into a command center, a war room. Her new lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s named Eleanor Albright, had been unequivocal. "Carol, this is what we call a slam dunk," she'd said during their first meeting, her eyes gleaming as she watched the video from Hawaii on her laptop. "The video is a prosecutor's dream, and the financial trail is a clean, straight line from your liquidated assets directly to his accounts and very likely to the purchase of that house. We have them." The strategy was set, a swift, brutal checkmate. They would offer a civil settlement under the explicit, legally permissible threat of a criminal complaint that would guarantee significant prison time. Carol felt a calm she hadn't known in months. It was the calm of a general on the eve of a battle, holding all the high ground and knowing the outcome was already decided. She waited until a Thursday evening. She picked up the phone and dialed Kevin's number, her hand perfectly steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was level, almost placid, devoid of the emotion she had been marinating in for days. "Kevin," she said, "I'm back. I need you and Jessica to come over to my apartment this evening. There's a family update we need to discuss in person." She could hear the faint electronic echo of his surprise, quickly masked by his usual smooth veneer. "Of course, Carol. Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice laced with the fake, cloying concern that now made her stomach turn. "We'll be there around 7. We'll bring dinner." "Don't," she replied, and hung up. When they arrived, they were the picture of sympathetic relatives, actors taking their final bows. Jessica carried a cheap bouquet of supermarket carnations, already slightly wilted. Kevin immediately put his arm around Carol in a gesture of suffocating comfort. "You look rested, Carol. The trip did you good?" he said, his eyes scanning the tiny apartment with a look of theatrical pity. "We were so worried about you being all alone." Carol didn't respond. She stepped back, breaking his hold, and pointed a single steady finger toward the small television mounted on the wall. "Sit down," she said. Her voice was flat, empty of warmth, and the command in it made them both falter. They exchanged a confused glance and sat on the lumpy sofa. Carol picked up the remote and pressed play. The bright, sun-drenched image of the Maui resort filled the screen, an explosion of color in the drab room. And then, there they were, laughing, drinking, kissing. Their faces, tanned and carefree, stared back at them in high definition. The color drained from Kevin's face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, and a small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. Their eyes were fixed on the screen in horrified fascination. "Carol, I can explain," Kevin stammered, scrambling for one last, desperate lie. "It was a celebration. The treatment. It was a miracle. It worked faster than anyone." But the words died in his throat as the video showed him flexing his bicep for Jessica, who squealed with laughter. The lie was too audacious, too monstrous to maintain in the face of such blatant proof. Carol turned off the television, plunging the room back into a heavy, suffocating silence. She walked to the coffee table and slid a thick, professionally bound legal document in front of them. "This is a settlement agreement," she said, her voice as cold and hard as granite. "You have 2 options. Option 1. You sign over the deed to my house, which my lawyer has confirmed you purchased with my money 3 months ago. You will also agree to a legally binding payment plan, with punitive interest, for the remainder of the money you stole from my 401k. Option 2. She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. "I walk this video, my bank statements, and your fraudulent clinic brochure to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. The charges will be wire fraud and theft by deception. Miss Albright seems to think you'll get 7 to 10 years. You'll have plenty of time to work on your tans in a state prison yard." She stood back, her arms crossed, watching them. She saw the collapse of their arrogance, the disintegration of their smug world, replaced by the raw, ugly face of pure terror. She had lost the brother she thought she had, but in his place, she had found an unbreakable strength within herself. She was no longer the victim. She was the victor, and she was about to get her life back.